There was a girl in third grade who used to volunteer to clean the chalkboard, not because she liked helping, not because she loved her teacher, but because when no one was looking, she would break off a piece of chalk and eat it. The powder, the dryness, the scrape of it against her teeth. She didn't know why she liked it. She just knew that when she felt stressed, when math got overwhelming, when the room got loud, that chalk made her feel steady. Because apparently her nervous system said, "We require drywall seasoning." But here's the thing, she wasn't alone. Across the world, children and adults secretly eat dirt, ice, clay, paper, soap, hair, laundry starch, and most of them never tell anyone. Because the moment you say it out loud, it sounds insane. But what if it isn't insanity? What if it's biology? What if it's deficiency? What if it's memory, or trauma, or culture misdiagnosed as pathology? Today we're talking about pica, not as a spectacle, but as a signal.
Okay, pause. Because if somebody told me they eat chalk, my first thought is not iron deficiency. It's, sir, ma'am, are we okay? But I also know something. People do not repeatedly crave something unless something is happening. Nobody wakes up and says, you know what would really hit right now? Gravel. That's not random. That's a message.
Exactly. Pica is defined as the persistent eating of non-nutritive substances for at least 1 month. But that definition is sterile. It doesn't explain why. And that's what we care about. Because the body does not generate urges without a purpose, even if the purpose is misfiring.
Clinical data indicates that pica is most commonly associated with iron deficiency anemia, zinc deficiency, pregnancy, autism spectrum conditions, obsessive compulsive spectrum behaviors, and severe stress exposure. However, association does not equal stupidity. It equals signal. The human brain is highly inefficient at subtle communication. It prefers extremes.
Let's talk about ice. Ice chewing, technically called pagophagia. There are people who crave ice constantly, not occasionally, constantly. They will chew it until their teeth crack. Why? Because chewing ice temporarily increases alertness in iron-deficient individuals. It stimulates blood flow to the brain. So what looks like a bad habit is sometimes the brain trying to self-correct fatigue. The body is clever, but it's not always elegant. Evolution gave us survival instincts. It did not give us a user manual. And chalk? Chalk contains calcium carbonate. Clay contains minerals. In some regions of West Africa and the American South, certain types of clay are consumed during pregnancy. Not secretly, not shamefully, traditionally. Now we have to ask, is that pica or is that culture? And who decides? If Act 1 was the behavior, Act 2 is the wiring. Because here's the uncomfortable truth. The brain does not crave chalk. The brain craves correction. And sometimes it chooses the strangest route to get there. Let's zoom in. Inside your brain, there are reward circuits, dopamine pathways, reinforcement loops. They exist to teach you what keeps you alive. Food, rewarded. Water, rewarded. Shelter, rewarded. But when something is missing internally, the system can misinterpret the signal. Iron deficiency lowers oxygen delivery. Low oxygen affects cognition. Fatigue rises. Brain fog increases. Now imagine your brain stumbles upon a behavior that momentarily increases stimulation. Chewing ice. Crunch. Snap. Alertness spike. Dopamine whispers, that worked. And suddenly, you're buying 3 bags of ice a day. Because nothing says biological imbalance like treating sonic drive-through ice as a food group. This is not weakness, it is a feedback loop.
The anterior cingulate cortex, which monitors error detection and conflict, is highly active in compulsive behaviors. When discomfort persists without clear resolution, the brain may generate substitute actions. The action reduces tension. The reduction reinforces repetition. This is not irrationality. It is pattern learning under stress. Humans are exceptional at solving the wrong problem efficiently.
That line should be embroidered somewhere. Humans are exceptional at solving the wrong problem efficiently. Because here's where it gets more complex. Pica is common in autism spectrum conditions, ADHD, OCD, trauma survivors, children in high-stress environments. Why? Because the nervous system under chronic stress seeks regulation. Texture can regulate. Pressure can regulate. Oral stimulation can regulate. If you've ever chewed your pen cap until it surrendered, you understand the principle. Now amplify that.
So, what you're saying is, sometimes it's not about the chalk. It's about control, or soothing, or quieting the noise in your head. Because when everything feels unpredictable, your brain clings to something tangible, even if that tangible thing is drywall adjacent. And honestly, that feels less crazy and more human.
Exactly. And now we step into something even more layered: pregnancy. During pregnancy, pica rates increase significantly in certain populations. Why? Iron demands increase, zinc demands increase, blood volume expands. The body is building another human. If nutrient intake doesn't match demand, the brain improvises. But here's the twist. In some cultures, clay consumption during pregnancy is normalized. It is not hidden, it is not shameful, it is ritual, which raises a dangerous question. At what point does Western medicine label something a disorder that another culture recognizes as adaptive? Medical textbooks are confident. History books are humbling.
Geophagia, the consumption of earth or clay, has been documented for centuries across Africa, the southern United States, parts of Asia, and indigenous communities globally. In some cases, specific clays bind toxins. Some provide trace minerals. Others may reduce nausea. However, contamination risk exists in modern environments. Lead, parasites, industrial pollutants. Context determines safety. Labeling determines perception.
And perception determines shame. And shame determines silence. Which means many people with pica never tell their doctors. Because imagine saying, "Hi, I crave soap." You don't expect curiosity. You expect judgment. But what if instead of asking, "What's wrong with you?" we asked, "What are you missing?" Because pica is rarely random. It is almost always communicative. Sometimes the message is nutritional, sometimes neurological, sometimes emotional, sometimes cultural, sometimes all four. And here's the deeper truth. When the brain doesn't get what it needs, it will negotiate with whatever is available. Your nervous system is not dramatic. It is resourceful.
So, if someone you love admits they eat ice obsessively, or dirt secretly, or paper in moments of stress, the response shouldn't be laughter. It should be curiosity. Because the body doesn't sabotage itself for fun. It adapts, even when adaptation looks strange.
But here's where we shift again. Because not all pica is deficiency. Not all pica is cultural. Sometimes it's trauma. And trauma doesn't whisper. It rewires. And in Act 3, we talk about that. There was a woman in her 30s who ate ice every night. Not casually, compulsively. She would wait until the house was quiet, fill a bowl, sit alone, and chew. The sound, the rhythm, the crack. It calmed her. She said it felt like releasing pressure in her head. Doctors told her, it's iron deficiency. And yes, she was mildly anemic. But iron supplements reduced the craving only partially. The habit remained, because iron wasn't the only thing missing. Safety was. When she was a child, loud homes meant danger. Silence meant survival. Her nervous system never stopped scanning, even in adulthood, even in quiet kitchens. And chewing ice was the only thing that drowned out the internal noise. Therapy is expensive. Ice trays are $5. But this isn't about cost. It's about regulation.
Chronic stress reshapes neural pathways. The amygdala becomes hyperreactive. The prefrontal cortex reduces regulatory control. The body remains in anticipatory defense. Oral repetitive behaviors can stimulate the vagus nerve. Stimulation can lower physiological arousal. Lower arousal feels like relief. Relief reinforces repetition. This is not moral failure. It is autonomic strategy. The body archives memory without asking permission.
That last line, the body archives memory without asking permission. And sometimes it files those memories under taste, or texture, or sensation. Children in neglect environments sometimes eat paper, or hair, or lint, not because it tastes good, but because oral stimulation is self-soothing when human soothing is absent. This is why pica is more common in institutionalized children and in extreme poverty environments. Because when nourishment is inconsistent, the body improvises. But here's the complexity. Improvisation can become imprint, and imprint can last decades.
So sometimes, when someone says, I crave dirt, what they might be saying is, I never felt grounded. And when someone eats chalk during stress, it might not be about minerals, it might be about control. That hits different, because now it's not about being strange, it's about being overwhelmed.
Yes, and we have to be careful, because not every unusual behavior equals trauma, but trauma increases compulsive loops. It narrows coping options, and the mouth becomes an accessible regulator. Think about it. Babies calm through sucking, toddlers self-soothe with pacifiers, adults chew gum, or bite nails, or smoke, or overeat, or chew ice. The oral pathway is ancient. It's one of the earliest regulation systems we develop. We outgrow pacifiers. We do not outgrow needing comfort. Now let's zoom out again, because here's where this conversation gets uncomfortable. In certain communities, especially in parts of the American South, eating clay during pregnancy has historical roots, and some of those roots are tied to enslavement. Enslaved African women sometimes consumed clay, sometimes to supplement minerals, sometimes to suppress hunger when food was rationed, sometimes to resist control. History complicates pathology, and trauma complicates biology.
Historical documentation suggests that geophagia among enslaved populations was interpreted by slaveholders as irrational or defiant. In some cases, punitive measures were enacted. However, environmental mineral deficiency and caloric restriction were also present. Interpretation often reflected power structures more than physiology. Medical narratives are not immune to politics.
And this matters because when medicine labels something without context, shame multiplies. And when shame multiplies, silence grows, which means people suffer alone. But I want to say something clearly. If someone is eating substances that can cause harm, like lead-contaminated soil, or sharp objects, or toxic materials, that is not something to romanticize. It is something to address, compassionately, not mockingly. Because pica can cause intestinal blockages, parasites, tooth damage, heavy metal poisoning. So this is not a quirk, it's a signal, and signals deserve decoding.
So, the real question isn't, why are you eating that? It's what does your body need that it's not getting? Iron, safety, regulation, connection, cultural validation? Because once you identify the gap, you stop fighting the behavior, and you start treating the cause.
Exactly. And in Act 4, we separate myth from medicine, because not all pica is trauma, not all is deficiency, and not all is cultural practice. We're going to untangle what's adaptive, what's dangerous, what's misunderstood, and what's treatable. Because clarity reduces fear, and fear is loud, but information is stabilizing. We need precision here, because once we introduce culture into medical conversations, things get tense. So let's define terms. Pica, clinically, is diagnosed when non-food substances are consumed persistently for at least 1 month in a way that is developmentally inappropriate and not culturally sanctioned. That last line matters, not culturally sanctioned. Because if something is practiced traditionally, intentionally, and safely within a community, medicine pauses before labeling it a disorder. But here's where complexity enters. Not all traditional practices are safe in modern contexts. Industrial soil contamination did not exist centuries ago. Lead exposure did not look the same. Environmental toxins changed the risk equation. So the question isn't, is this cultural or pathological? It's, is this safe? Tradition is powerful, but so is lead poisoning.
Safety evaluation requires nutritional screening, iron and zinc levels, lead testing when soil is consumed, assessment for gastrointestinal damage, psychological screening when compulsive behavior is present. If a behavior corrects a deficiency and resolves once corrected, it suggests physiological origin. If behavior persists without deficiency and increases under stress, psychological origin becomes more likely. Overlap is common. Humans rarely fit into clean diagnostic boxes. Biology and culture are non-enemies. They are layers.
That layered reality is where most confusion lives. Let's talk about pregnancy again. Studies have shown increased rates of geophagia among pregnant women in parts of Africa and the southern United States. In some cases, clay consumption may reduce nausea, provide trace minerals, bind plant toxins. But modern commercially sold edible clay products are not regulated like pharmaceuticals, and soil contamination varies dramatically by region. So what was adaptive in one environment may not be adaptive in another. Context determines wisdom, and that principle applies to everything. Biology does not care about nostalgia. Now let's address something clearly. When pica includes hair ingestion leading to trichobezoars, sharp object ingestion, soap, detergent, chemicals, or persistent dirt consumption with medical complications, that is no longer cultural practice. That is medical risk, and risk requires intervention, compassionate intervention, not ridicule.
Because if someone is eating hair until it forms a mass in their stomach, that's not tradition. That's distress. And what I appreciate about this conversation is we're not swinging to extremes. We're not saying all dirt eating is ancient wisdom, and we're not saying all unusual cravings are insanity. We're saying pause, investigate, understand. That feels grown.
Yes. And here's something else important. Children under age 2 explore objects orally as development. That is not pica. Neurodivergent children may mouth objects as sensory regulation. That is not automatically pathology. Intent matters. Frequency matters. Harm risk matters. We must differentiate between exploration, regulation, deficiency, compulsion, cultural ritual. Because when everything is labeled disorder, nothing is understood. And when nothing is understood, stigma wins.
Diagnostic categories are tools. Tools are useful, but tools can also flatten nuance. Human behavior is rarely singular in origin. Multiple variables often converge. Nutrient imbalance, stress exposure, neural wiring, cultural imprinting. The question is not which one. The question is how many. Systems thinking reduces shame.
Exactly. And that's where we're heading now. Because after all this complexity, we need grounding. If someone watching this recognizes themselves, what do? If you crave ice constantly, get iron levels checked. If you crave dirt, test for deficiency and environmental safety. If you eat non-food items during stress, evaluate coping mechanisms and nervous system regulation. If you feel shame, replace it with investigation, because shame delays care, and care changes outcomes. The body does not submit anonymous feedback forms. It sends cravings.
And honestly, if you've never experienced this, be grateful, but don't be arrogant, because the line between normal and unusual is thinner than people think. Under enough stress, any brain can get creative.
And that creativity is what makes the human body fascinating, sometimes frustrating, but fascinating. In Act 5, we close this out, not with fear, but with meaning, because the real lesson here isn't about chalk, it's about listening. Let's simplify this. Pica is not a personality flaw. It is not a punchline. It is not something to whisper about like a secret. It is a signal. And signals exist for one reason: to get attention. Sometimes the signal is iron deficiency. Sometimes zinc. Sometimes pregnancy demands. Sometimes neurodivergent sensory wiring. Sometimes trauma that never fully processed. Sometimes culture misunderstood. Sometimes more than one of these at the same time. And here's the part I want you to remember. Cravings are not random. They are attempts. Attempts to regulate. Attempts to repair. Attempts to restore balance. They are imperfect attempts, but they are not malicious. Your body is not chaotic. It's negotiating. And negotiation means there's something to discuss.
Homeostasis is the body's central objective. When imbalance occurs, compensatory mechanisms activate. Some are subtle, some are strange, some are socially inconvenient, but they are rarely meaningless. Clinical intervention is appropriate when risk is present, but intervention without curiosity is incomplete. Understanding precedes healing.
If you see yourself in this conversation, start with data. Check iron levels, check zinc, check overall nutrition, check lead exposure if soil is involved. If labs are normal, look at stress, look at coping patterns, look at sensory regulation. There is no shame in needing support. There is no shame in discovering a deficiency. There is no shame in saying, my body is doing something unusual. Unusual does not mean broken. It means informative. Your nervous system is not trying to embarrass you. It just has terrible PR skills.
And if someone you love admits something like this, please don't laugh. Curiosity is kinder than commentary. Because imagine carrying a craving you don't understand and being afraid to say it out loud. That's lonely, and health should not be lonely.
The girl who ate chalk? She eventually learned she was iron deficient. Supplements helped. Therapy helped more, because stress was part of her pattern, and when her stress lowered, the craving sated. Not overnight, but gradually, because once the brain felt supported, it stopped improvising. That's the lesson. Your body improvises when unsupported, supported, and the improvisation quiets. Pica is not about dirt or ice or chalk. It's about listening. Listening to blood work, listening to history, listening to stress, listening to culture, listening to yourself. Because the body does not sabotage, it signals, and signals are invitations. If this helped you understand something about yourself or someone else, share it, not as shock content, but as clarity. Because the more we decode strange symptoms, the less power shame has. And clarity stabilizes.
Your wellness testing every single day. Laugh a little, learn a lot. We're here for you.